What's up, Big Bear Nation? Welcome back to the homestead. Y'all crack me up. It's like y'all got an invisible fence here. Y'all picking through what the other ones wouldn't pick through. Hey, baby, what you doing? Huh? You won't let me pet you? Oh, you just want to touch me. About 2 weeks ago, we brought in 2 dairy cows from Virginia. And right away, milk production was a problem. So we've been brainstorming over those last 2 weeks to figure out how we could increase their milk supply. So we started focusing on the grain that we provide to them. And Jason mentioned that back when he worked in the dairy, that they used to bring in brewer's grain or distiller's grain. And I kind of turned my head at him and I was like, but that sounds like alcohol. And he said, well, it's not alcohol, it's just the grain that they use to make the alcohol. I was like, yeah, but it's still alcohol. Won't it make our cows drunk? Well, of course, that's a silly question, right? Because can you really get cows drunk? I actually Googled that to see if you could. And you would really have to give them quite a bit before they would actually get drunk. You weren't crazy about it the first day that I brought the camera out, were you? No, but now you're like, oh, let me lick it. Oh. You can't lick the camera. So brewer's grain, distiller's grain, where do you find it? That's a good question. I'm glad you asked. The first place that I went to was our feed and seed. And initially, they told me no, that they didn't carry it. But later, when we went to actually do a feed run, we found out that they carry dried distiller's grain, otherwise known as DDG, here in Georgia anyway. But what they do is they take the dry grain and they ground it up really, really fine. It almost looks like a powder, which I suspect is the powder that is usually in a lot of our feed that ends up getting wasted because it doesn't bind to anything. So when I initially got the no from our feed and seed, the next thing I could think of was to call a brewing supply company. And we have quite a few of them around here, but there's one that's really good in Greenville called Grape and Grains. It's also Shoeless Brewing Company. So I went by there and they said, well, yeah, we have barley, we have malted barley, we have wheat, we have all of these different things. So pretty much you can pick whichever distiller grain or brewer grain you want, put it in a bucket, ferment it, and you'll be fine. I thought, I've fermented feed before. I know how to do that. We can make that happen. What you doing? You eating some grass? That's some good grass, isn't it? That's a nice tall stuff. You like that. But then an older gentleman came out and he said, well, what are you trying to do? And I said, well, I'm trying to improve the lactation on my cow. I know that sounds really strange. And he's like, actually, it doesn't. He said, but what you probably want is spent grain because it also has the brewer's yeast in it. And I went, yeah, you know, Jason said something about spent grain. That makes sense. I said, but I'd need to have a brewery to find that, right? And then I looked around and realized they weren't just a brewing supply company. They actually sell beer as well. And I was like, oh, you guys brew your own stuff, don't you? He's like, yeah, every week. So he asked me if it was something I wanted to do regularly, and I said, well, as long as it works, absolutely. So he's put me on a rotation where about once a month I'll be able to come up and pick up the grains to be able to bring back here to the house. So now we have 3 options. We have the dried distiller's grain from our bulk feed and seed place. We have the fermented barley that we put in a bucket, put some water on it and let it sit for 5 days. And we also have the spent grain that came from the brewery. And we have been using all of that. And so far, it seems to be helping quite a bit. So one last thing about spent grain. Spent grain, when you get it, it's going to be wet. Still has a little bit of the remnants left from when they were brewing the beer. And so what happens is, because it's so wet, you have to use it fairly quickly. Otherwise it will mold, or if you leave it out in the sun for too long, it will ferment. So we have used all of what we got. We used it all up very quickly. However, our next time that we get it, once it gets nice and hot, we're planning on laying out a tarp and just letting it dry on the tarp out in the sun. And hopefully we'll be able to prolong using that as well. So from what I can tell, our cows are super happy. Their milk production is going up. And in fact, it cannot make your cow drunk. Thank you for stopping by the Big Bear Homestead. God bless, and have a nice day.